Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. The primary identity, in a sense, of my guest today is as the Director General of the Council for Scientific Industrial Research, but he is truly a Renaissance man of science. As a polymer scientist, he's got more than 230 papers that he's written, edited some 20 books, received some 13 plus honorary PhDs from around the world, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. R.A. Mashelkar. The Council for Industrial Research and Training is the largest chain of research and development organizations in the world. You've been heading this for 9 odd years now. What does the organization have to show for it? It's sort of hard for us to believe that in India that this is the largest chain, because you don't normally associate research of this kind with India.
Yeah. Well, CSIR, as we call it, is something that has been contributing to lots of goods, may I say. At the Council of Scientific Industrial Research, because we are in industrial research, we contribute to creating private good, obviously. Industrial production. For example, last year the turnover based on our processes and products was close to 5,400 crore. It does public good too, in terms of generating new knowledge, scientific research. Every 1 out of 7 scientific research papers that is published from within India is from CSIR. For example, we contribute to strategic goods. For example, one sees light combat aircraft, but very few people know that 40% of the components were designed, developed and fabricated by National Aerospace Laboratory, or it will not fly without wings, and those carbon composite wings were done by us. And also it contributes to social good, so as to say, job creation. Just a recent example, in menthol mint, China used to be number 1, we used to be number 2. Now we have displaced them to number 2 position. How? One of my laboratories, Central Institute of Medicine Aromatic Plants, they developed these varieties called Himalaya, Koshi, Sambhav, and thousands of hectares are under cultivation, with early maturing, 25% more oil yielding and so on and so forth. And 4 crore man days of jobs have been created as a result of that. And most importantly, 70% of the menthol mint is produced here. So therefore, if you look at private good, public good, strategic good, and social good, there is a lot that CSIR has done over the years.
What do you think is the secret of its success then? And this is obviously sort of not a story widely in the public domain. It's something that specialists and people working in the business of the trade are aware of. Exceptional success, isn't it? What is the secret, apart from sort of, you've been credited with all kinds of applause for having built, restructured, revitalized the CSIR. You've been credited with building these connections with business, of being able to sort of, work with the unions after sort of, dealing with them somewhat firmly. A whole range of techniques and processes. It's something that we in India seem to be struggling with to make public institutions work. So what would be the secret that you would claim has made it happen?
To begin with, Rajiv, I would simply say that CSIR transformation story is being looked at as a model story around the world. Just 29th November, I was in Washington. The World Bank president had invited 4 of us to talk about what World Bank should be doing in terms of science and technology, innovation and so on. And the issue of public institution transformation came up, and they told me that they look at CSIR as a model. In fact, he wanted me to join a meeting with Putin on 4th of February so that Russian institutions could sort of make it. You look at the book by Sumantra Ghoshal on world class in India, 1991 to 2001, which are the institutions which have managed the radical change the best? Of course, Wipro is there, Infosys is there, but there is a chapter on CSIR. Or Jen Naralikar's recent book on scientific age, the top 10 achievements of the 20th century. He begins with Ramanujan's work, then goes to Raman and so on and so forth. And the last one is CSR transformation. To sum it up, therefore, whether it's a scientist, technologist, management guru, or World Bank president, all of them look at it. Now, your question is, what made it tick? I think the first thing I must say is Team CSR. Because we had 40 laboratories which behaved like 40 laboratories, as though they were individual entities. And I said, no, this is not on. Basically, we are one unit, all right? So first it was Team CSR, then of course Team India. That was first. The second was looking at research in a completely different way. Looking at research as a business, as a product, and doing it in a business-like manner. I believe that was very important. The third one was actually to say that India matters to us, we want to matter to India more. That was the theme of our directors' conference. And therefore, the total realignment, so as to say, of objectives. And one found the response. You know, what I find, Rajiv, is that when you have institutions, they become great because of two things. One is that they create great ambience. And second, they have a great ambition. Ambition without ambience wouldn't do. Ambience without ambition wouldn't do. What we did during the last 9 years is to gradually build up our ambition to be world class, at least in certain areas. But while doing so, we created the kind of ambience within the laboratory, the flexibility, the freedom, so that we don't become Delhi-centric, and the action is in the
Even though the first thing you said was Team CSIR, I think there is a popular perception that a great deal had to do with your charismatic leadership. What about leadership? There's also this feeling that there is a crisis of leadership in the public sphere, certainly in India.
Well, a lot of people have given me credit for that. It was very kind of you to have said whatever you said. Well, it has a role to play, very frankly. I believe a leader has to have three things. And surprisingly, they are linked to our own body. One is innovation. It comes from here. The second is compassion. Compassion comes from the heart. And third is passion. Innovation, compassion, and passion. Now, what is innovation? What is a good definition of an innovator? Innovator is one who does not know that it cannot be done. When I set targets, for example, people say, no, it cannot be done. I say, no, we will do it. And therefore, you find a huge difference. In 1995, we had just 5 to 6 US patents. This year, we are close to 200 US patents granted to us. Those stiff targets which are set actually could be met. Innovator is also one who sees what everybody else sees, but thinks of what nobody else thinks. We were able to visualize the new opportunities that will arise as India becomes a global research, design and development platform, and position CSR suitably. You know, when multinational was a bad word, we became partners with multinationals, because when we held hands with the best in the world, we had to run at their pace. And the other thing was compassion. People. At the end of the day, we are talking about people and doing it with passion. And that passion has to be not just the Director General of CSR, not just the director, but every single individual. I believe these were the three things that we tried to push very hard.
You briefly mentioned the whole notion of knowledge as the driving force, and it's something that you have been writing and speaking about extensively, how that we are becoming a knowledge-driven economy, a knowledge-driven world, a knowledge-driven society, and the great hope for India is that if we can consolidate and build on this notion of knowledge and the multiplier effect of knowledge and the catalyst of knowledge. But at the same time, it seems that with the very narrow pyramid of knowledge in India, certainly in terms of our educational institutions, our structures and processes, that the knowledge is really an exclusive preserve of the elite. You know, we often talk about the traditional wisdom and the traditional knowledge and at the base of the pyramid, but that isn't really something that is able to manifest and apply itself. So on what basis do you base this great optimism for India's future on driven by knowledge?
Well, I think first of all, you are dead right when you say, when you talk about the pyramid. Yes, it is true. 50% children go to school, 30% of them go up to 10th standard, 40% pass. So we are talking about 6% of eligible children who should go beyond 10th standard actually going beyond 10th standard. That is not on. And therefore, we must widen that particular base. There is absolutely no question about that. However, one has to realize that when we talk about, for example, India as IT software superpower and whatever, what are we talking about? We are talking about 600,000 software professionals. But the issue is that 600,000 software professionals, which is 0.06% of Indian population, generated 20% of our export last year.
But you know, people like M.S. Swaminathan have said that, you know, much of this sort of is an illusion because they're really techno coolies, I think is the phrase that's been used.
I don't worry about that. I wouldn't worry about that. What is happening is that you begin that entire process by creating a name for yourself, a brand for yourself, and gradually you go on value addition, and that is happening as a matter of fact. But the important point I really want to make is that 0.06% is the tip of the iceberg. I would say tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg, but it was capable of creating wealth, 20% of our exports, and by 2008, 35%, one-third of our export. What was the age group? 26 and a half, all right? Now, what I'm saying is that this particular pyramid can be enlarged. For example, the same tool of IT, apart from using it for wealth creation, it is possible to do that entire social upliftment by using IT. Just give an example. 200 million people in India are illiterate. Look at Kohli's computer-based functional literacy. It had the power to make India literate within 3 to 5 years, entire India literate, not having to wait for 15 to 20 years. This is a model, we won't have time to get into it. But the central issue is that looking at technology again as a power which is held by the top apex of the pyramid, I personally believe there is a total social transformation that is possible.
You know, we frequently get sort of the prophets of possibility and hope, you know, such as yourselves. But in terms of the translating that into reality, we still find that the structures of governance, of authority, of disseminating these tend to fail in the delivery systems of what you know, the scientists hold forth as the ideal or as the possible. You have managed this great transformation in CSIR, and we touched briefly on this issue of what were the elements that made it possible. What is the basis of your optimism that this will truly happen and not just be something that remains in the pockets of excellence and the elite? It isn't limited to Bangalore or a few experiments that we can boast of, but truly becomes a national phenomenon.
Well, I would put it to like this. One of the great things about India today, very frankly, is that India is a young country, all right? We have an enormous advantage, the demographic advantage, so as to say. That youth is, in my judgment, our hope, because that youth is optimistic and it believes that things can be done, and I meet them as I move across the country. The second issue is about growth. You know, there's something very interesting about growth. Let me tell you a little story about lilies in the pond. Here is this particular pond which has lilies which have a peculiar habit. Those lilies double up every day. So let us say after 30 days, the entire pond is full. On what day will it be half full? 29. Quarter, 28. 1/8, 27th. And 1/16th, 26th. That means on 26th day, if you go there, only 1/16, that is 6% of the pond is full. 94% is empty. All right? So you can give up that pond and say nothing can happen here. To me, India is like that lilies in the pond. We are on that 26th day where we find that growth that is taking place is just like that lilies in the pond. And you take any sector that you talk about, whether it is highway building, whether it is mobile phones, whether it is this youth sort of marching ahead, I believe that is the one that actually gives me hope.
You have spoken often about the globalization of knowledge and also sort of, you know, the prophets of possibility and hope. Frequently based this on this notion of India and nationalism. In the context of globalization, of economics, of knowledge, of you know, political interconnectedness, what sanctity, what strength and value does this notion of an India that's going to bloom by, whichever report you look at, 2020 or 2050, to what degree does it really have value and significance?
I'll put it to you like this. I believe the real comparative advantage that we have is the human capital, all right? And that is manifesting itself. More than 100 companies have set up their R&D centers here, as you can quite clearly see. And these are not small centers. Like I was there in the General Electric R&D center, 2,300 people, all right? But the beauty, Rajiv, is that out of those 2,300, 700 are young people who have opted to come back and work here. And that's a phenomenon that is happening basically everywhere. So what is happening is that, as we know, 1% of population carries 90% of the intellectual energy. And we kept on losing that 1% population. But suddenly one is finding that the latest Intel chip is being designed here. The latest aero engine of General Electric is being designed in Bangalore. The latest tuberculosis drug is being designed by an Indian drug company. The latest car in the small car segment is being designed in Pune, and so on and so forth. And I'm suddenly finding the reversal, the beginning of the reversal. I would say it's a trickle, it's not a torrent. And I'm laying very heavy emphasis on that, because that might look like a small number, but as I said, it is carrying 90% of the intellectual energy, which left India, which added to the economic might of the other countries, not to us. I'm beginning to see that trend has started. That is the one that gives me, I would say, great hope.
You've also written and talked extensively about the brain drain. Conventional wisdom had it that if people left a developing country to go on to a developed country, it was a short-term loss but a long-term gain, and in some ways it's sort of equalized. You have argued that that's not necessarily the case.
No.
Why?
Because, as I said a little earlier, the economic benefit that comes out of intellectual prowess has to be given within the country. I mean, I returned as a young man when I was in my early 30s, doing my very best for this country. And like me, there have been several others. What each one of us added as a value, and we may be only 100, was enormous, as a matter of fact. And that has to be done within the country. It is not the remittances of dollars by being outside and earning there and creating an economic strain there that matters for the country. It is not remittances. It is being here and doing things.
What are the elements? I mean, what brought you back, more than sort of 2-3 decades ago is very different now. And you've talked about the sort of the psychic value that people feel they get in a more positive, productive, supportive working environment, as the United States, which is the greatest draw. So what is it that motivates people like you that many years ago to come back, and the 700 people that you have mentioned who have come back to work in India? What is the driving force?
It has become a cliche when people say that you can take an Indian out of India, but not India out of an Indian. But I believe in that, honestly, all right? And this comes up in many ways when people listen to Indian music, this, that and the other, even when they are there. Their hearts are there. All that we need to do is to provide opportunities for them here. It's almost like, I'll put it to you like this. I was interviewing once as a chairman of the National Innovation Foundation, a young man. And I found that he said that he's an expert in branding. So I said, come on, I want to brand my India. Now, he was puzzled because he had branded a Limca and a soap and something, a refrigerator, but never a country. So I said, I'll give you, let's say, an idea. US brands itself as a land of opportunity. Pat came his answer. He says, India, I will brand it as a land of ideas. Now, Rajiv, here is the good news and the bad news. The good news is that we are a land of ideas. The bad news is that US is the land of opportunity. Can we create opportunities for these people? All right? That's the issue. And that is why I said that with these opportunities coming up, whether it's a chip design, aero engine design, new drug design, car design, other things, which did not happen in the pre-liberalized era, in the era where there was no competition, so people survived without innovation. That era had changed. And that, I believe, is going to be the greatest driving force.
You talked about this quality of being Indian, of the Indian in the Indian. What does that mean for you? What is Indian about you, and particularly in the context of someone who's a scientist, which is seen to be very sort of impersonal and empirical, this human quality of being Indian?
Well, I believe there are values, for example. I mean, if you go back, it is not just 10,000 years of history, it's that culture, that heritage. It's for example, when we say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, I believe it is one of the greatest values. People started talking about global village, etc. now, but we talked about it several years ago. I remember people give me a lot of credit for fighting that turmeric battle. I'll just tell you what that value is, for example. People ask me, why did you fight the turmeric battle? The wound healing properties of turmeric, they were patented by US, and I fought that, and that became a new paradigm, as a matter of fact, on traditional knowledge. There is a little story. You know how it happened? My mother, for example, has been responsible for it in some way. We were sitting on a hot summer outside my home in our garden, and suddenly a bird came and fell. Its wing was broken, and I remember my mother running and actually bringing a little turmeric powder and then making a paste and applying it. But you know, Rajiv, the beauty of that was that for a moment she did not actually feel that what is applicable to a human being, what works for a human being, will it work for a bird or not? All right? To me, that was a deep message, basically. You see, I believe that is sort of India about. And what the whole world needs today, honestly speaking, is Indian way of life, Indian way of thinking. All these conflicts that we talk about, the 9/11s, this, that, and the other, etc. You can have all the technology in the world, to protect yourself from terrorism. But if you don't change this, if you don't change these values, if you don't have this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, let's say, principle embedded in you, nothing is going to happen.
What happens when you look at many of these traditions that we often hark back to, that have been held up philosophical? We talk about how our sciences had already spoken about many of the principles that modern science is discovering and talking about today. There's this constant harking back. But in what reality of contemporary current India, with Gujarat and Ayodhya and sort of many of the explosive elements that have fragmented India, do you see those values still survive? Where do you see it survive?
I feel very worried, to be honest, because tolerance is something that we not only practice, but we preached, and the rest of the world learned from it, and we seem to have lost it. As an old man, now I'm turning to 63, I get worried about it, all right? Because if that is lost, everything is lost, right? I personally believe that we are going through a phase, and we will come to a stage where once again we'll recapture the sort of old glory. I heard something very interesting on the other day. For example, this splintering of families and so on. Amazingly, in Europe, I met somebody who is talking about a joint family system coming back. You know why? Because of economic reasons, of course, there. Demography, this, that, and the other, etc., etc. Whatever be the reasons, I personally feel, having gone through that particular transition, we will come back to that, yes.
And do you see this sort of sense of values and the potential for it to return in an essentially world that is becoming essentially more and more mechanical, that is becoming more and more technological? In your own work and striving, how do you seek to reconcile this notion of values? Does it really have a place?
I believe so. In fact, if you lose value, you lose everything. And that is why I often said, if I go back to my schooling and so on and so forth, etc., our foundation was based on values, basically, whether it was within the family, within the school, within the society, and so on and so forth. I have tried to argue out that must be the same in institutions like CSIR. That must be the same in the corporate world. For example, today we talk about governance and this, that, etc. After Indrons and so on and so forth, etc. Why? Why is that particular case? Because they were lost. Because values were lost. So whether it is the corporate world, the society, the nation, the values must be imbibed. Now, the issue is people are trying to rediscover them after they go through catastrophes. For example, people started talking about good governance and principles after they saw catastrophes like Enron and others. But you now see, for example, even in the corporate world, the fact that they just should not be creating financial capital but also moral and ethical and social capital is coming up front in chairman's speeches. So that is why, of course, I'm a dangerous optimist, so you might feel that but I'm a great believer that by going through these tsunamis, so as to say, that will continue to happen, these will start coming back.
As a man of science, how do you look at these tsunamis? Just sort of, accidental processes based on causality and in a very mechanistic way, or philosophies of karma or something larger than that. Why do those people have to suffer?
Well, look, I have just taken over as the president of Indian National Science Academy on 1st January. And the very first thing I did was to organize a major meet where we got 300 people, including people from 6 countries, 21st, 22nd of January, where there were very major presentations by some of the best experts in the world.
There's all the scientific data,
Yeah.
the scientific
So they were also
predicates to it.
Yes,
So
yeah.
what about the philosophical one?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as this being karmas and so on and so forth. No, I don't believe in that, because I think the physics of what happened is extremely clear. What I'm concerned about is, can science do something better? Can science be predictive so that we know that these events are happening? Can we be more prepared? And that was the thrust of our entire meeting, so that not a single human life is lost. Actually.
So how do you, as a philosopher and scientist and engineer, reconcile philosophy with the sort of mechanical, impersonal acting out of natural forces?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. I've been struggling because, many people, many times when I'm interviewed, people ask me, are you religious? Do you believe in God? The rest of the philosophical questions and so on and so forth. Very frankly, I've not come to grips with it, to be honest. I do believe there is a power beyond, but I'm not able to sort of explain it, excepting to fold my hands and say, can you, for heaven's sake, make sure that there's a peace and prosperity, not for the select few, but for the whole world. That's all that I've been able to do. But I have not understood it myself.
Dr. Mashelkar, thank you very much.
Thank
this
you.
has been a great privilege.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.